Suddenly, the horn of a flying, speeding car from behind, and in less than a second, bam! It collided with the crippled car. He said, the young man in between the two cars fell to the ground with critical injuries. We rushed to the scene, grabbed the young boy, took him to the car, called the ambulance, called the hospital to prepare for our arrival. The ambulance was going to be late, so they put him in the car. He mentions that he was of blossom age, tender age. He was a young adult, still in his late teens. He was mumbling something, but we could not understand what he was mumbling due to the rush that we were in. He said he was religious. You could tell from his appearance. Then the police officer said, when we placed him in the back of the car, we could make out what he was mumbling. He said, through all that pain, through all that suffering, his heart was reciting the verses of the Almighty Lord. He said he was so immersed in the recitation that, subhanallah, you could not even tell that this young man was suffering. You could not even tell that this young man was suffering. The police officer said his clothes were soaked in blood. His bones were clearly snapped in many places. However, he continued with his unique, tender, soft voice, reciting the verses of the glorious Quran. Suddenly, the officer said, as we were listening intently, me and my partner, a shiver climbed up my spine. The hair on my arms and my legs stood up. I watched very carefully at the young man as we were driving to the hospital. His hymn became silent. He raised his hand, raised his index towards the sky, and said, La ilaha illallah. Allahu Akbar. He said, La ilaha illallah. Thus he slumped. Thus he slumped. He said, quickly I went to the back of the seat. I felt his breathing. I felt his pulse. I felt his heart. He was dead. He was dead. He said, I could not stop staring at his face, the beauty of his face. A tear fell from my eyes, but I hid it in shame. I turned to my partner and told him that the boy's life has ceased. He's finished. That young man is finished. The police officer burst in cries. And thus when he heard his partner crying in such a manner, he could not hold himself. The whole car, the patrol car, was fogged with emotions. Was fogged with emotions as they were driving to the hospital. They reached. They struggled through the corridors, telling the nurses, the doctors, the onlookers what had happened. One of the hospital staff went and called his home. His brother picked up the phone and said, after being informed of his brother's accident, he said my brother would go and visit his only grandmother every single week who lived outside the town, and he would make sure that he would always spend time with those poor children and orphans who were idle in the streets. The whole town knew him, he said. They knew him because he used to give them Islamic literature, cassettes, books. He filled his old Mazda, his dusty old Mazda, with sugar and wheat and rice and even candies for the poor people in that town. Yet he himself was struggling to live. He himself was struggling to live. Yet he preferred those orphans, those poor children, those poor families over his life. Thus, his last words was very easy. It wasn't hard for him to utter, La ilaha illallah.